Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I am super excited to be joined by Dr. Libby Weaver. Now, Dr. Libby, I feel like needs no introduction. For those that need an introduction, Dr. Libby is a nutritional biochemist, a sought-after speaker, and author of 14 books. She's on a mission to educate and inspire, enhancing people's well-being and wisdom, igniting a ripple effect that transforms the world. Now, that is some mahi I can get behind, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you here today. Libby, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jess, for having me join you.
I'm really excited about this conversation because, you've taught me so much. I've followed you and read most of your books, and I think there's so much we can learn. This is one of the bedrocks and foundations of our success, and yet I think particularly for women, so often overlooked, or something we don't quite get the chance to squeeze in when it makes such a massive difference. So thank you for being here today. I want to start with your story, really. What ignited your passion? How did you find yourself doing what you do now? And where did it start? And where did you find the passion for what you share with the world?
Jess, so I essentially can't bear unnecessary suffering. And I feel that so much unnecessary suffering comes from us not necessarily understanding how our body works and how to decipher what our body is whispering to us with symptoms. The body doesn't have a voice, but it will let us know whether it's happy or not with our choices. And we don't always like what it's communicating, but I really want my work to help women especially to understand little shifts that can make such a big difference to their quality of life and how they feel and function. And nutrition obviously is my original training, and I care very much about that. And I think it's very difficult to obviously have great energy, which can have a big ripple effect when we are really fatigued. It's really hard to have great energy when we're not nourishing ourselves, not just with food, but also, I guess, on a soul level. So there's 3 pillars to my work: biochemistry, nutrition, and emotions, or you could say mindset. So I try to bring all of that to life to minimize unnecessary suffering is the quickest and simplest way I can say it.
Yeah, nice. And there's so much of that out there at the moment, unfortunately, in terms of how we live our life and some of those consequences and knock-on effects. And we talk a lot on the podcast about productivity, performance, leadership, that kind of stuff. And yet health is the foundation that powers all of that. And yet so many of us identify as being exhausted, have no energy, super stressed. When you wrote Rushing Woman Syndrome, am I right in saying I remember reading that book? I was still in the corporate world. I was on the edge of burnout. And I think it was 15 years ago. Does that sound about right?
Yes, it was 2011, which for me feels like minutes ago, but that's actually, 14, 15 years ago. So isn't that wild?
It's so wild because I remember reading that book and going, I had this big aha moment of, this is me. I am a rushing woman. Everything you're talking about in that book, this is me. And it's kind of the catalyst for what started my own journey. And yet I feel like 15 years on, we're having the same conversation. I look around and there are so many rushing women still. What's your advice? I mean, what's changed 15 years on for you, and what advice would you give to those women that I guess you've been giving, right, for the last few years?
Yeah, so when I wrote Rushing Woman Syndrome, I thought it was just a glitch in the matrix. I honestly thought it was just this moment in time where things had become way more intense and it was going to settle down again. Well, I was wrong because it's only gotten faster. And the book essentially speaks to not just what happens physically to us when we juggle all of the things when we essentially live with the constant and relentless output of stress hormones. And the book describes how that can disrupt digestion, how it can disrupt our sleep, how it disrupts our reproductive hormones that we produce. And they obviously do far more than just contribute to fertility. They play a big role in our biology and how we feel, to our mood, all sorts of things. So that book goes into detail about the way living with persistent stress affects our physical health, but also looks at why we do that. So why on earth are we prepared to essentially sacrifice our own health in this, I want to say service of others, but really when we're sacrificing ourselves, it's more like servitude. And where I kind of got to with it was we care, we stress because we care. You can sort of see that a rushing woman has a really beautiful heart. She cares deeply about so many things and so many people, because if we didn't care, we wouldn't stress. But beyond that, if we take it a little bit further, we can also see that, yes, we care, but we also care what others think of us. Not everybody, but certain people. And some of them deserve to, we're human, we're always going to care what other people think. And some of them, I think, kind of deserve to be in that space in our life. They might be people we genuinely treasure, whose opinions we value, whose characters we really admire. But there are a lot of people, I think, now who can influence that, or we worry about what they think of us. Some of them we possibly haven't met. I know that's certainly the case for a lot of younger people, teenagers on social media. They get very stressed about social media because it's a mechanism through which they're essentially seeking approval, whereas for older people, they would never describe social media as a stress. It's a way to connect with friends who live overseas, or I use it to watch wombat videos because I think wombats are hilarious, so it's kind of like entertainment. But where essentially that body of work goes around rushing woman syndrome is to help people understand that our stress can also be a really glorious teacher if we allow it to be. It can help us to see where we are trying to often prove to people that we are a certain way, that we are kind or thoughtful or selfless, or that we are hardworking or competent, reliable. So it's almost like we're trying to prove that we own those traits. And I think it's incredibly helpful if someone identifies as being a rushing woman to understand or deeply appreciate that you are already those things, and others will naturally see that in you. You don't have to prove it to them. And it's really beautiful work, I think, when you dive into it, that more inner work, and that's where the shift can really come. And then you can still have a busy, full life, but you wouldn't describe it as hugely stressful. There might be days or moments that still are, of course, but it's not that overarching, I just can't handle this, and that really sort of knocks our resilience down.
Yeah. Oh, so well put. And I think I've seen that become the norm, that, stress and overwhelm all the time is just life, as opposed to we should have periods of that in our life because we're human. And yet it shouldn't be all of the time. I think you touched on that care. I often see, because we care too much, we do too much, particularly as women, in that whole kind of people pleasing piece that certainly has been a feature for me. And I love the additional pillar you have around emotions in this space, because a lot of the time this isn't knowledge, right? Sometimes I find we know what we should be doing to look after ourselves, but that's not the issue. It's either the time or the permission or feeling guilty. What's your advice to busy women who need to do more looking after of themselves and are struggling with that?
Beautiful question, Jess. Thank you. So it almost comes down to our values. So there are only ever going to be 24 hours in a day, and we make time for what we prioritize. So it's a really terrific exercise to do, is to actually understand your own values. And when I say values, I don't mean ethical preferences like kindness or generosity. I mean, what does your life actually demonstrate that you value? So, and often when we don't even feature on our own lists, we value making sure X, Y, and Z has happened in a day, but not necessarily that we've had a moment of space, or a moment to go for a walk, or a moment to cook ourselves a nourishing dinner. We've just grabbed takeaway because our priorities are elsewhere. So I think there are definitely times when our health and nutrition might not be on that, in the top sort of 3 priorities, because we might have, for example, a child might be sick, or you may have an elderly parent who needs your care and attention, and your focus might be that they might become a priority for a time. But if there's nothing extreme going on in our life, and it's just general life, which is busy and full, if we're not featuring on that priority list, then usually eventually our health will tap us on the shoulder and say, I need you to make some changes. And a big part of, too, to round back to your earlier question of what drives me, I'm essentially trying to prevent the suffering, sort of the diagnosis. I'm trying to help people act on what they know in their hearts they need to act on today. We don't want it to take a diagnosis before someone makes some adjustments. And as I said, when the body will whisper to us, and if we're not paying attention, it will eventually shout. And we want to listen to the whispers sooner rather than later. So I think it comes down to values, Jess, and prioritizing our own well-being and prioritizing that care for ourselves. And that can look like all sorts of different things. My best friend, she just loves a bath and lighting candles, and that's totally her vibe. That is so not my vibe. That is not how I look after myself. My idea of looking after myself is pausing, watching light change, watching sunrise, sunset. It's just a pause in the day that just speaks to my soul, and I can feel it sort of energizes me in a way that's sort of beyond what words can convey. That's really important to me, whereas someone else will think that sounds nutty and, that doesn't speak to them. So it's finding what is really nourishing for you. And of course, I can't help but round back to nutrition. It's very hard to have really great energy when we're living on lots of ultra processed food and not enough actual food. So nutrition really matters.
Yeah. The foundation, right, that everything else kind of then builds from. You mentioned before kind of stress, cortisol in the body, the impact that has on so many functions and hormones. What are some of the things, because I think most of the women I know have too much cortisol running around in their body. We are in this space of stress and that fight flight so much of the time. What are some of the things to look out for in terms of some of those early warning signs? You talked about with the whispers before we get the big kind of tap on the shoulder and get to that point where we're sick. What are some of those early warning signs and things we should be looking out for where we know that that's an issue for us?
So feeling tired but wired. So when fatigue goes on for more than about 2 weeks and it's not restored by sleep, you want to take notice of that. That obviously can be all sorts of things. It can be the stress response. It can be iron deficiency, all sorts of things. So definitely that tired but wired feeling. Also sleep disruption. I feel that not sleeping in a restorative way has almost been normalized, but it's not normal. When our body has lost the ability to do something so fundamental to our survival, if that's not a little bit of feedback, I don't know what is. So when we stop sleeping in a restorative way, there's information in that, and we want to get to the heart of why we're not sleeping really well. So sleep disruption is another significant indicator. Also, when we live with persistently, cortisol is supposed to be nice and high in the morning and then lovely and low in the evening, allowing us to fall asleep and stay asleep. And it starts to rise again at about 2 a.m. So when someone is in what I call stage 2 stress, usually their morning cortisol is still okay, but the evening is elevated. So that's part of the sleep disruption. And it can also lead someone to, it essentially can lead to blood glucose dysregulation. So we start to not manage our blood sugar as well as we once did. That doesn't happen in the short term when there's just a momentary sort of elevation in that evening cortisol. But when that persists, when that elevated cortisol persists, then it can. And also then our immune system is not as robust as it could be when we live persistently with that. So you start to notice you get more frequent colds, more frequent infections. So, and again, it's so easy to just write all of that off to a busy life. Oh, yeah, I noticed I got 4 colds this winter instead of my usual 1, or I'm not sleeping as well. I'm a bit tired. I'm craving sugar. We sort of go, that's just life. But they're all just little symptoms. They're all just little bits of feedback that there's something that's just not quite right. And it may be, there's some of the cortisol ones, but obviously those things can be driven by all sorts of other things too.
Yeah. And just hearing you reel that off, you were talking about me 15 years ago sitting down reading that book. All of those symptoms were present, and I don't think that's a coincidence, right? And for some of those listening in, we're probably ticking off the list and going, oh God, yep, that's me. And I think it's so useful because you're right, we do write this stuff off as, I'm just busy right now. This is just the normal part of being a woman doing the juggle, and it's not. And I think the sooner we normalize that it's not normal, the sooner we are at that space where we can then take action to change it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm getting my way through Fixed Iron first. I'm about 2/3 of the way through now. And I love how you can make complex science issues or information easy to understand for us. Can you tell me why? I'm particularly interested in this because I am one of those women who was, when I had the bloods done at the doctor, was sort of, oh, your iron is normal, but it was the low end of normal, which I've since come to understand isn't perhaps that normal. And I was still having a lot of the fatigue that you talked about. So can you tell us why this is so important and why it is the one thing that changes everything?
You're so lovely to ask about it, Jess. Yes, it is. It is my latest book. I actually started writing a book about perimenopause, but I was about 62,000 words in, and I realized the first 11,000 words were about iron deficiency, and it needed its own moment in the sun because it is the most common nutritional deficiency in the world, and I think, including in New Zealand, and I think other nutrients have sort of become trendier. People are really focused on things like magnesium and vitamin D, and creatine's also having its moment. And there's nothing wrong with any of that, but iron is the big gun. It is the most common nutritional deficiency, particularly for women across the menstruation years, for teenage girls, for athletes, and also sadly for children. So it really does need our attention. And when we look at having blood tests for iron, it's very useful to have iron studies done, and that will give us 4 parameters in our blood reflective of what's happening with our iron status. So iron studies will measure what's called serum iron, and that's a reflection of our dietary intake, or if you're taking a supplement, it'll show that shows up in serum iron. Then there's another measurement called transferrin, and transferrin becomes elevated in iron deficiency. Now, that sounds strange because you think, oh, but isn't it measuring iron? And what do you mean it's high? It's because transferrin is like a taxi that drives iron around. It's a taxi that's trying to pick up iron and move it. So the body will produce more taxis in an attempt to pick up more passengers, the passengers being iron. So transferrin goes high in iron deficiency. So when we talk about normal ranges, the normal range for transferrin for adult women in New Zealand is 2 to 3.6 grams per litre. But once it gets above about 2.6 grams per litre, so even though that's inside the normal range, that's a sign that the body is seeking more iron. So some more focus on iron-rich foods and or a supplement may be necessary for that person. Iron studies will also measure transferrin saturation, so that's basically how many passengers are in the taxi, and then ferritin, which is iron storage. And think of that like your backup battery. So ferritin, the normal range for adult women is 20 to 220 micrograms per litre, and that's a really broad normal range. And we have to have normal ranges because it would be crazy chaos without them. But my worry is that bottom number, 20, is too low for us to have really great health and energy. So I like to see ferritin at a minimum of 50. A lot of women tell me, and there's some literature to support this, that a lot of women feel better when it's at something more like 80 or even 100. And part of it is we need iron for so much inside of us. We need iron to be able to deliver oxygen to all of the cells that make up our physical structure so they work properly. We need iron to be able to produce thyroid hormones. So it's a very common scenario for people to have persistently low iron and a thyroid that's got a tendency to be underactive. That's very common. We need iron to be able to produce some of our key neurotransmitters. So it has a big impact on mood. And I think that impact on mood probably goes beyond neurotransmitters, but that's something science already understands. So iron is needed to produce dopamine for motivation. It's needed for GABA, which is very calming, serotonin, melatonin. So sleep is actually one of the things. Sleep disruption obviously can be caused by all sorts of things, but iron deficiency is one of them, and it's hardly ever talked about. Even restless legs can be a sign of iron deficiency, and that obviously can be a big sleep disruptor too. So the iron is needed for so much inside of us. So when that backup battery gets too low, when the ferritin is at the low end of normal, for example, I've had lots of people over the years say to me, oh, my ferritin's 22. I'm told that's fine because it's inside the normal range, but they don't feel fine. So that's why I say get your ferritin to minimum of 50, but a lot of people feel better when it's even a little bit higher than that. Doesn't need to go sky high, but 50 to 100 is a terrific sort of range to aim for. Even more so if you're a woman who's still menstruating, even more so if you have very heavy periods, or if you're going through a perimenopausal transition that involves more frequent blood loss, so you might menstruate twice or 3 times a month instead of once. That's not everybody's scenario through perimenopause. perimenopause though, but they're the sorts of things to consider where iron requirements might actually increase for someone, and that's where a real focus on making sure you're having enough dietary iron and or a supplement can be very helpful.
Oh, I mean, I was amazed that it does so much. Iron is responsible for so, and I had no idea half of this was the case. And yet, you're right; it's not one of the fashionable supplements that we often talk about, right? In all of the magazines. And what I love about the corridor and the conversation that you're having around iron is that it can be responsible for so much. And there can also be so much happening, but it pays to rule that out first, right? Because I think we're being treated for so many other things, whether it's sleep, mood, anxiety. And sometimes this can be the underlying thing. And I love the fact that this is quite easy to fix. And then if you've still got some issues, go and figure out what it might be, because you know now it's not iron.
Spot on. Beautifully said, Jess. It's kind of like, let's address, if you're iron deficient, let's address that first and then see what's left over. And sure, there might still be some things that we need to work on, but for some people, it's not. It's that resolving iron deficiency changes all of those things. So yeah, it can be at the heart of so many symptoms and so much unnecessary suffering.
Yeah, fabulous. So it was a real eye-opener for me reading this book, and my own kind of iron journey as well alongside that. So you've kind of been, I guess, a 25-year overnight success. You've got 14 books under your belt, a phenomenal amount of work in the world that's making such a difference. But I think it's easy sometimes for people to look and see the end of that journey and go, wow, you're amazing. You've done all this. There must have been some challenges along the way, some times where you felt like stopping, where it got hard. What made you keep going, and what makes you keep going? And how has success changed for you over the years in terms of your relation to it and how you define it?
I would not describe myself as an ambitious person. I didn't ever really set out to do any of this, to be honest. All I knew as a child was that I wanted to write. My mother gave me a journal when I was a little kid, and my first journal was when I was 4, and I just used to write how many eggs I collected from the chickens. But it got me into the practice of daily writing. So I knew I wanted to write books, and then it became clearer to me in my early 20s that I was very interested in human nutrition and psychology, sort of why do we do what we do, even though we know what we know. So it was more curiosity rather than I'm determined to make this happen and do this. I know that works for a lot of people. It's not that's not my way. I am very much someone who something will arise, an idea will arise from me, or someone will present an idea to me, and it's almost like I have a yes/no button on the inside. And as long as I don't always go with that, but I'm better at it now than I used to be, following the yes/no button. And when it's a yes, it's very uplifting, and it's very, even when it's really tricky, I was going to say hard work. It's not really hard work. It is hard work, but I don't want to phrase it that way, because in the big scheme of things, it's not. But it's sort of like, and particularly with iron, I tried to develop an iron supplement for 8 years, and there were many times when I had moments where I thought it's just impossible, because I have a supplement company called BioBlends, and everything's made from food, and it would have just been so easy to go and get a synthetic one made in a laboratory, but it's not my philosophy. They're not my standards, if you like. And so it took 8 years to develop Iconic Iron, the really groundbreaking iron supplement that we've released. And what made me not give up on that was the pursuit of essentially making a difference with the unnecessary suffering, not just for people who can choose to have an iron supplement, but because I think, for example, there are children in families with very attentive and very loving parents, and the parents may not know that the child is iron deficient, but they would address it if they knew that. So I wanted to support them and provide them with information, food knowledge, supplement, etc., that could make a difference to the way that child grows up with good iron status. But then there's also children who go to school hungry. They come from really hard places. They're going to be iron deficient. And then there's children in developing countries who don't have access to iron-rich food. So it was the first, and I think it probably comes from, I was diagnosed as iron deficient in my teenage years, and I was so fortunate that my mum was curious as to what was happening with me. So she took me to the GP and they found it. And so it was treated, but it's almost as if that stuck with me, and it's remained almost a motivating factor that, you know, every child deserves to grow up with good iron status, and have solutions on offer to address it if they do find out that they are deficient. So, and it's more important than ever, because sadly the numbers are growing. The numbers for teenage girls right now is really concerning, Jess. So a study came out in the US at the start of last year, and they were looking at girls aged between 12 and 21, and 39.6% of them had iron deficiency. That wasn't even iron deficiency anemia, the most severe form of iron deficiency. There'll be even more who have anemia. So it's affecting a really big number of the population. So I don't think of success as far as it's more like reach to me. It's more that if more people are interested in this topic and then taking action on it, I guess that's how I would define success. Yeah, but it's not something I went, you know, I'm on this determined to do this. It was just, it arose. It was very clear. And I will add, really magical things happen almost when you stay on that mission. Yeah, when you don't give up, when it does feel like, oh, I've hit a roadblock, but you don't see it as a roadblock. It's just, okay, no, that's not the way. I've got to go this other way now. Yeah, determination, I think, is probably a big factor.
Yeah, oh, it has to be, right? But I think passion as well, that's what I kind of felt coming through there. When you're ignited by a passion and that's driving you, even when it gets hard, you find the energy to push through. And I think seeing the impact that has, and I often think, you know, with people and people like you, the reason that you've got so many books in the world and you're so well known is because of that impact. Because if the stuff you were writing about wasn't what people needed, no one would buy the books, right? And so I think that's kind of testament to that success. But I loved what you said there about the inner yes no button. I think we all have one of them. I feel like sometimes it's buried or we don't listen to it. And I love this notion of just being able to check in with the decisions we make, the choices we have with that inner yes no button. Know what that feels like. I thought that was something that kind of, as a metaphor, we could use for so many other things as women. So what's next for you? I mean, you mentioned that you were kind of more than 60,000 words into a book when kind of you realized actually the book was about iron. So is there another book happening? What are you up to at the moment? What's next? How can people get involved with this work that you're doing?
Thank you, Jess. Yeah, right now, my whole world is all about iron and helping people to understand all the different roles it plays in their life and in their body. And yeah, I'm on a real mission to resolve it, help people resolve it for as many as possible. So that's all my whole focus right now. So the way it relates to thyroid, the way it can lead to a more challenging perimenopausal transition, the way it impacts a child growing up, their cognition, their growth, their development, their ability to focus and concentrate, all those things. So yeah, it's I feel that that'll be my focus for a really long time, to be honest. And I'm very happy about that. And I've got all sorts of speaking jobs happening and just love doing these podcasts and chats. And I wanted to say, Jess, too, that I'm so appreciative of the way you care and your support. You have, I've seen your gorgeous face at my events for quite a while, and the energy and enthusiasm you bring, and you're always so encouraging whenever I see you at an event. And I really appreciate that. And it's been such a consistent thing to see you, and you're always that consistent, high vibe, supportive, encouraging. You're the first to say congratulations about something I've done. So I'm very thankful to you for the interest you've taken in my work and for sharing it on your platform. So thank you.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. I share it because I think it's useful. And, you know, I feel like for the likes of me that writes books and speaks, you know, it's fabulous to see other people making a success of it and doing it as well. You kind of know what goes into it. And I think it's really important work to be doing in the world. And of course, it's work I've benefited from as well, right? I'm in the audience because it's useful. It's useful. I need to hear these messages, right? And translate them for my own energy. So where can people find you? Where is the best place for people that are going, right, I want to know more about iron, I want to know more about what you're up to, book you to speak, or the bio blends? Where's the best place to send them?
So my website is drlibby.com, so drlibby.com, and that's all my education work. The books are there, and then BioBlends, the supplements, all made from food, that's at bioblends.com as well.
Fabulous. Dr. Libby, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing some of your wisdom.
Oh, it's such a pleasure, Jess. Thank you again.